Ah, we're getting serious now. Cask strength. So the same juice as before, and technically a similar cask recipe, being bourbon and sherry casks, so similar to the Tomatin 12-year-old that I reviewed recently, but this one is bumped up quite a lot. So you could say that this is really the appeasement from Tomatin, the olive branch that they're offering the enthusiasts by giving us a much better presentation on this one. So you could say that it's the Tomatin for the enthusiasts. And when we say cask strength on this Tomatin, we are talking about a strength of 57.5% ABV. And that's interesting because if you look at multiple batches of this, because this is a core range product, it's fairly available and very affordable, I think, for a cask strength whiskey. You will notice that the ABV seems to be the same on every batch of this stuff. So I think what they're doing with this, like Glenfarclas 105, they are vatting and blending in the vatting to hit a specific ABV target rather than a specific flavour profile, which I've confirmed. I've talked to the people at Glenfarclas and I know that they do that. They actually mix casks to get the right ABV with the 105, and I think that that has pros and cons. I think that on one hand it probably keeps costs down because they can have one box, one label, one presentation, no marketing, no graphic design. They're using the same physical presentation for every batch. But on the other hand, you have to wonder if they're really prioritizing quality when they're adding casks to the vatting and they're not thinking, oh, this vatting needs a little bit more of this flavour. They're thinking this vatting is a little bit on the wrong side of the ABV mark, and they're choosing the casks for that reason. But anyway, enough grumbling about that. We have got a almost integrity presentation in a Tomatin, which is a wonderful thing. I'm really glad that they've given us this one because it's not only cask strength at 57.5% ABV, which is a wonderful strength, but this one is also guaranteed to be natural colour and non-chill filtered, which makes it one of the very few official bottling Tomatins that can actually say that, so that's a really nice touch. I think without a doubt they are making this stuff for you and me. It's also very reasonably priced at about £50 to £55 here in the UK. Obviously the one and only drawback with this is that it's a no-age statement whiskey. So we can pretty safely assume that it's going to be younger than the Tomatin 12. How much younger? We have no idea. But we do know that it's matured in the same first fill ex-bourbon casks and ex-Oloroso casks. So in theory, it's the same cask recipe as the 12. And while this isn't a 12-year-old whiskey, it does have something else very important to offer, and that's intensity, freshness, and punchiness. And I don't know about you, but I think that intensity matters a hell of a lot. I think that weak whiskey is the devil. And cost matters, but I find it very hard to tolerate weak and watery whiskey. I think that when you're talking about serious whiskey, presentation goes a hell of a long way, and flavour is carried by ABV. So if you have a low strength whiskey, you've got a low flavour whiskey, almost always. So hopefully this one is going to be everything we've been asking for. Tomatin cask strength on the nose. Very sugary, very fruity, but I'm going to emphasize sugary on this one because the sweetness on the nose of this one is distinctly different. Even at a lower ABV, it's distinctly different to the sweetness that you get on the Tomatin 12. The nose of this one, I'd describe it more as sugary nougat and red grapes and dark chocolate. There is a little bit of gooseberry in there, gooseberry and strawberry jam. So there are notes in common with the Tomatin 12 and the Tomatin House style. but I'm getting a much more sugary, slightly confectionery note on the nose of this one. And in particular, I think that there is more evidence that there is sweet, sherry seasoned American oak casks gone into the vatting as this one. I would probably say it's fair to say that this doesn't have the same age and depth as the Tomatin 12, but I think that it more than makes up for it with that vibrant freshness and just pure intensity of flavour. Let's have a sip and see what it's like. I have tasted this with water. I've tried it at lots of different ABVs. I think that once you get a little bit of air into the bottle, and especially if you give the whiskey some time in the glass, it's more than drinkable at full strength. But your miles may vary. Drink it at whatever ABV that you want. Tomatin Cask strength. Let's have a sip. Actually, very, very interesting that this is the only one of these tomatins, I'm pretty sure, that has a guarantee that it's natural colour. And ironically, it's by far the darkest. There is more liquid to look through here, so it's a little bit of an unfair comparison, but it's much darker than what you get on the Tomatin 12, despite the fact that they're both matured in bourbon and sherry. So I think that tells you something, and it backs up what I was saying about the aromas on the nose, and that's that I think that the sherry that goes into this one, I think this one is more traditional, old school sherry. I think that the sherry that goes into this one, I think that they're using more sherry seasoned American oak casks to just give it more freshness and more punchiness, and probably keep the costs down a little bit as well. I think that this is a very different sherry to what you get on the Tomatin 12. It is not a stronger, younger version. It is a different beast. But anyway, going back to the palate. Strawberry, cocoa, a little bit of cocoa and a little bit of a spicy oakiness and a little bit of a spicy pipe tobacco note, as well as some like polished oak, French polish, a little bit of leather armchair perhaps, and some jelly sweets creeping in. There is a little bit of a jelly sweet note on this one, and that's not something that I always love. But interestingly, I think that the jelly sweets note and the high strength of this, it actually reminds me interestingly a little bit of the Highland Park cask strength release, which obviously is another high strength, no age statement cask strength release with very fresh sherry. And I don't think that that's a coincidence. I think that what Tomatin are doing with this one, I think it's a very similar maturation and a similar cask recipe to what Highland Park are doing with their cask strength. I do think that the flavours that you get on this Tomatin cask strength are slightly simpler than what you get on the 12-year-old Tomatin. I think that you're getting fewer tertiary flavours from the maturation, and that's undoubtedly because it's a younger whiskey. And I think that on the cask strength, you're just getting more straightforward flavours from the distillate and the cask. Luckily, Tomatin distillate is a fruity powerhouse, and this cask strength bottling carries it perfectly. I think that the casks seem to be really good quality. So, in my opinion, this is absolutely lovely stuff. It is a youngish, but not immature, supple young whiskey, but it's beautifully made and really vibrant and punchy. It's really every cask strength whiskey enthusiast's dream when it comes to an affordable cask strength release, especially once you dial in your preferred ABV with a splash of water. As I said, I am drinking this at cask strength because that is generally my preference. Unless I think that there's a little bit of harshness that needs to be toned down, I will drink at cask strength if I have the option. But I think at 57.5%, although this isn't super strong, I think that you will at least want to try a little bit of light dilution. Let's have one more sip and look at the finish. The finish on this one, sweet, fruity, spicy, very, very, very long, with a really pleasant astringency, and I think that's coming through from the sherry and the casks. And I think that the finish on this one, and it's kind of predictable because Tomatin aren't known for their integrity presentations, but I think the finish on this one is the best by far in the Tomatin OB range. I do think that it's effectively impossible to compare this to the 40% or even 43% expressions. On the one hand, you're searching for flavours and holding it in your tongue to give it the best chance and really work with it to extract the flavours and get the most from it. And on the other hand, you're rushed by those flavours. They rush to meet you and overwhelm your palate. So I do think that they are really polar opposite experiences. I think that the only slight reservation that anyone may have with this one, and for the record, I think that it's really wonderful stuff, but the only thing that might put some off is the fact that you have dropped that 12-year-old age statement. And to start with, I thought it would have been nice if they could have kept that, even if it means adding £10-15 onto the price. But the more I work my way down the bottle of this one, the less I care, because I think they've been very clever about what casks they use in this one, because they've used that fresh and very sweet and juicy sherry. I think that goes a long way to make up for the relatively lower age. I think it's really quite similar and quite fitting to compare this to the Highland Park cask strength release, in that you're trading age for well-made intensity and integrity. And they even have some similar flavours, although in my opinion I actually think that this is a better whisky than the Highland Park cask strength. But more importantly, I do suspect that they're doing a similar thing with this, with a mix of those bourbon casks and those first fill, what I suspect is sherry seasoned American oak. And like the Highland Park cask strength, this is also an amazing asset for the home blender. Yes, I think when you first crack the cork on this one, the high proof can be a bit fiery, but I think try it with water. By all means, try it with water. Don't suffer through it, but I think that over time, with air, it's utterly brilliant, with or without water. And I think that if you are accustomed to your cask strength whiskies, then I think out of these 4 Tomatins we've looked at, I think if you're after a quality Tomatin and value high proof and intensity, then this is probably the one that I would pick. And more than that, I think I'm probably about nearly halfway through this bottle. I can see this being one that I replace. Overall, I think that the cask strength expression really shows how age statements aren't the only marker of quality. I think that age really, really does matter. I think that people, and they're usually distilleries or brand reps who say that age doesn't matter, are really being a little bit dishonest. But I think that there are other things that matter, and by that we're talking about presentation, ABV, and cask selection. All of these things matter just as much as the maturation and the age. And as we've seen with Glenfarclas 105, I think that sometimes presentation matters a hell of a lot, and sometimes can even surpass even higher age statements with a poor presentation. Yes, the sherry here is different from the double cask, and even different from the 12, in that it's fruitier, fresher, less dry and more vibrant, and I think that was a really intelligent choice. This absolutely is not just the 12-year-old with less age and more water, and as I said, my guess would be that they're probably using fresher casks for this, whereas the double cask is probably the opposite end of the spectrum, where they're using more of the refill casks, whereas this one really shows what I assume is that first fill quality. Other recommendations for things that you can try if you like this, I think you're really looking at independently bottled bottlings if you want anything like this from Tomatin. I do actually think that the English Whisky Company here in Norfolk, their Sherry Butts release, they are hard to get because they're very, very small batch and distribution is not on par with what Tomatin are doing. But I think the English Whisky Company Sherry Butts has a similar super fruity malt and fresh sherry profile And I think that in particular, some of the red range releases from the English Whisky Company have an intensity that matches this and probably a maturity that exceeds it. And I think really obviously there's Highland Park cask strength, but really the other one that comes to mind as a recommendation for something similar to this has got to be Glenfarclas 105. And while I really like Glenfarclas 105, I do think that it adds a lot of oak spice compared to this. I think that with your Glenfarclas 105, I think it tastes to me like they're using more European oak, which I think is an acquired taste. So by all means, if you've had Glenfarclas 105 and you think you'd enjoy something with that oak spice toned down a little bit, this is probably one for you. But really, if you are a Tomatin fan, and I think after these, I think I can say that I am a Tomatin fan. I don't like the presentations on some of them, but I really like the house style. I think that they're producing really good new make, really good distillate, and it goes a long way. And I think if you're looking for a Tomatin that really packs a punch and delivers on freshness and showcases that bold distillery character, then I think this one is really, really hard to beat. And when you consider that this stuff is under £60 here in the UK, it's a very recommendable low-risk buy. Perfect for fans of high-proof sherry-forward whisky and home blending experiments alike. I think this one might actually have earned a place on my coffee table because I've really been enjoying it and I'd like to have a little bit more. Most of all, I think that it's really fantastic that Tomatin seem to have actually listened to people like us and given us an affordable, quality, integrity presented, mostly enthusiast dram. It really appeals to the things I value, and I think it's a really good one. Hopefully you do too. Let me know what you think. Thanks for watching, and cheers.
Ooh,